I've just about completed the flight bow, but you can see in this view that the limbs aren't aligned very well. But this is only a prototype for sort of testing, and I've made an adjustable arrow rest on an overdraw of about 3 inches. So you can see there's the brush rest, and there's the that's probably about the back of the bow, so it's probably more than 3 inches at the moment. So what I need to do is draw the bow with an arrow on it, if you like, and put a knocking point on and adjust everything so that the arrow tracks fairly straight. Now what I expect will happen is at the first shot the string will pop off the ends of the limbs and the whole thing will turn into a disaster, but I'll shoot a fairly heavy arrow to start with, and it will have to be shot through a release aid or a flipper or something. But you can see overall it's looking quite nice, and that's the sort of archer's eye view. That's how it sits in the hand, except I struggle to even hold that up with my elbows giving me considerable jip. Of course, when you've got the tension on the string, when you're pulling with the other hand, it relieves a lot of the weight off the bow hand. But certainly an interesting test bed. What I'm trying to do here is see how the arrow tracks as I draw it back. You know, does it waggle left to right, up or down, or whatever? And I'm using a full length arrow to try and give me a better idea. Yeah, it's touching, that's going down through the sight window. Not a lot, so that knocking point probably wants to be a whisker lower. Although the back end of a flight arrow would be slimmer than that. So at least that's giving some sort of idea. I've added a little shim of sandpaper there and removed a shim that was on this limb. So now the string alignment's a lot better relative to the limbs, but you can see it's slightly to the left in the sight window. But I've got adjustment on the brush rest there to accommodate that. So I'll be raising the brush rest a whisker and moving it that way, and then redoing my test with the arrow. Then maybe I'll do an actual test shot. Right, I'll have another test after I've done all that adjustment. Alright, the arrow's kicking over to the left. Not a huge amount. Whoa. Right, I've made a flipper to shoot the bow with. It goes over one of your little finger, either your little finger or that one. I prefer that one. That wraps around the bowstring, then that wraps around again, and you use a pinch grip like a kid would use shooting a bow. Then as you ease off the pressure, these bits just straighten out and the arrow goes on its merry way. So I've got a lighter arrow on there now, which is more like a genuine flight arrow. And I've adjusted the arrow rest, the brush. So hopefully, let's see. Don't look too bad. Certainly feel the draw weight a bit more now. But of course, trying to draw it slowly, it's much harder. I mean, normally when you're shooting, you give it a bit of warmth. I'll look at that video anyway, and I think I'm ready for a short draw test shot maybe. But we'll give it a go. That should show up. Bad words, that does hurt my elbow. But what are you going to do? If you've got a hobby, enjoy it, or could sit down being a miserable old git at home. The good news, I mean, I didn't get quite to full draw, but the string stayed on nicely. That probably smacked into the overdraw. I think the string's a little bit long, and I think if I had my elbow brace on and I manned up a bit, I'd be able to shoot that all right. The flipper's a bit rough, being this sort of braided material, and it's sort of sharp at the edges where I cut it with a hot knife. I made a leather one before, but I didn't get on with it. I think the leather gripped. I mean, because it's braided, it's slippy, but then because it's woven, it's a bit, you can feel it clicking over the weave. Anyhow, the arrow's stuck in fairly straight, I think. I don't know if you can see it from there. Well, there's the arrow. I wonder how far that's stuck in. Jesus. That went in a substantial distance. And it's got no pile on it, but it was an experimental arrow. Right, it's got no pile on it. I cut it to 20 inches, but it was an experimental one made with pine and a sliver of ipe down the middle. But I can weigh that, see what it weighs, and all in all, I'd say that was a pretty successful test. The main weak point in the whole thing's my left elbow. Perhaps I'll see if they've got new elbows on eBay. Bye bye, boys and girls.